Okay. Welcome everyone to our June/July Arcadia Book Club. We had to reschedule because last month we were having tornadoes and power outages and things like that. So we're going to meet tonight to talk about The Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. And I loved this book. I don't know that I loved it as much as Station 11, but I read Station 11 a long time ago. So let's talk. We're a smaller group, but a mighty group. So I think everybody here will have something interesting to say. And how about if you say something interesting, James?
Oh, okay. Well, I will try. First of all, Kate, your lighting is bad again. You need some front light. Tell your lighting designer to get some front light on.
My cat ate the lampshade, so that's why it's just a light bulb now.
Yeah, well,
sorry.
That's what can I say? I've heard homework, but never a lampshade. So that's good. Well, okay, I'll start because I did. Before we were going to meet last month, I had this big pad of page numbers and ideas, and so then I went back with this book and with this copy and kind of started to look through, and then I started reading big chunks of it again, because one of the things I love about a book that has a mystery at its center, and I think I love the most when they really aren't mystery books, is to then, once you've read it, to go back and kind of see how she laid in the clues and laid in, what happened and tries to. And did any of you figure it out before the hero figured it out?
Nope.
Yeah, I didn't either. Although I sort of felt like once it happened, once he revealed what it was, I thought, he being the guy, Gaspare. I thought, one of us should figure that out. I bet somebody figured it out ahead of time. But as we are noticing, what a perfect week to talk about this, given all those pictures from the telescope. I mean, come on. Isn't it just that amazing? I just can't get over that stuff. I'm going to be so disappointed if I slip off this mortal coil before somebody comes to visit. I'm going to be really pissed. So I've been reading.
Hasn't already.
What?
I said, how do you know someone hasn't already?
Well, how do we know one of us isn't? But we don't know. But that kind of leads me to that whole simulation idea, which is really, a lot of people talk about simulation, and whether this is some kind of, we're in somebody else's game. And I thought there's two little quotes. I have to find the second one, but one of my favorite things about once his sister brings up the simulation idea, he's talking with his friend where Gaspare is working at the the hotel, and
When he talks to Talia.
Yeah, when he talks to Talia.
And she says that the lights.
Yeah, isn't that?
That was one of the things I noticed.
It just makes you laugh out loud.
Yeah, I marked that quote too, James, on page 137 or 133.
Yeah, I love it. Actually, yes, I have thought about it. I don't believe we're living in a simulation. Talia was gazing past me, past the lobby to the street. I don't know. Maybe this is naive of me, but I feel like a simulation should be better, I mean, if you were going to the trouble to simulate that street, for example, couldn't all the street lights work? And I just think that's such a great, it's one of the things I love most about this woman as a writer, period, is her utter absorption of the way we really are and the humanity we all kind of carry around and the goofy idea, the things we fixate on and the things we think about. And everybody just is so achingly human in her books that it's just so great. Oh wait, I think I found the other one. Hold on, please. Hold, please. Except, the one annoying thing about the book is there are many pages that aren't numbered. And so it's a little, for instance, this one. Oh, well, I'll find it. This isn't it, because I can't figure out the pain. Okay. So here's one more. I'll do one more thing, and then we'll just see what people thought, or if you have particular things. But I loved that the book started in such a sort of pedestrian way, and in such a just kind of, it's interesting stuff. And it's actually, I heard an interview with her, and it's kind of, this guy is based on a great uncle of hers, who was one of the remittance men who kind of got sent to the New World because their families didn't know what to do with them, and the families were all running out of money, and go elsewhere and make your fortune, kid. Good luck. Don't write. Bye-bye. And she grew up on Vancouver Island, on the northern part of Vancouver Island. I think she lives in Toronto now. I'm pretty sure, maybe not. But I love that it was just absolutely normal. And then the guy goes into the woods because he feels embarrassed for these women, and he runs in the middle of the forest. He runs into this priest, and then so you're not really sure what's going on. And the priest says, "Well, maybe I'll see you later." And the guy doesn't know why the priest is there, or even who the priest is. And and you're kind of absorbing this as you're reading it, and you're thinking, what is going on? And then he goes to the church, and the priest is there, and they start to have a conversation, and it's a very bad conversation. And we find out 150 pages later why it's a bad conversation, because it was his first interview attempt and he failed utterly. But we don't know, we don't know now. And then all of a sudden he just disappears. And I just thought that was so great, and then he shows up at this other, then seemingly the same guy shows up 80 years later, and he's the same age. And he says that, remember the thing he says about COVID when they're in the bar?
Yeah.
He says, "Oh, blah blah blah. Oh no, that doesn't happen." And it's and that was COVID-19, and they are looking at him like, "What are you talking about?" And then he says to himself, "Oh yeah, it's only January." I just think that those, I love the way she just drops those in, and just assumes you're kind of remembering them, and then when we finally move to the time that the book takes, the real time of the book, 300-400 years later, it all starts to make sense in retrospect. Was that appealing to all of you, or annoying, or mysterious, or was it helpful or not helpful?
I loved the book. I absolutely loved the book. I was kind of glad actually that we got delayed. Not that I wish tornadoes on anybody, but it gave me the opportunity to read The Glass Hotel before I read this, which was cool. But yeah, it didn't, I guess because I'm enough of a kind of a sci-fi geek a little bit, and read stuff about time travel and time space anomalies and stuff. It didn't bother me. I want to go back now, like you said, and read it again and pick up on all those clues.
Yeah.
That she lays out so masterfully all the way through. And even like when he's in the when he meets oh, what's her name? Not Melanie, Malila.
Yeah, yeah.
And she says, I saw you before under the overpass and you said my name. How did you know my name? You know, they were all just those little clues.
Yeah. Well, now, oh yeah, Mirella, yeah. Well, and the
Mirella.
interesting thing, because I just finished rereading that little section, and what she writes about that is that Gasperi is legitimately confused
Mm-hmm.
because that hasn't happened in Gasperi's life yet.
Yeah.
He's still on his first journey in time. And so he doesn't know that he's going to be, except that, you know, I mean, at least that's how I read that. I don't know if, did everybody else read that too? I mean, or feel that way? I mean, you sort of feel like, I did once start to make notes of how the time actually works. And it's very complicated.
And there was something else that tied all the way back to the Glass Hotel when he wrote that, when he wrote on the wall in the prison.
Right, yeah, I want to go back and look at that again too.
Yeah, see, I haven't read
About-
the Hotel, so I'd really love to read that. But apparently they're making a series about the Glass Hotel, I think, like they did of Station 11, which I have not yet seen, and everybody who's seen it just loves it. And I love that book so much. I was a little worried to see the version. Has anybody seen the version of Station 11 that was on television?
It's very good. Yeah, it's I almost like the screenplay better than the book.
Oh, wow.
There's some twist in it, but it is really good. I reread the book again, yeah, it's a very good rendition. I mean,
Oh, cool.
it holds to the book, but it's even better, I think, which is unusual. Usually that's not the case. For
Yeah, usually that's
Yeah.
like that.
I mean,
Wow.
it's different. It's different. It's yeah.
She
Okay.
was involved with it. So I think that
Yeah.
she had some control over it. But I think it's gone beyond what the book went, right?
It
Oh.
did. It did a little bit. Yes. Yeah.
And
Because my husband hadn't read the book and we were watching it together, and I'm like, wait a minute, that didn't happen in the book. I don't think, because I had read the book a long time ago. So,
Huh.
but yeah.
don't you sort of feel like, I mean, just because she likes to kind of go back and forth with characters, I sort of feel like the next book is going to be Vincent's story and why she was on that ship and what happened to her.
Well, if you read Glass Hotel, you'll know why she's on the ship. But we
Oh.
don't know what happens to her. And I thought the same thing. I thought, oh, that's so open-ended
Yeah,
that
yeah.
Vincent could show up anywhere.
No star burns
I thought
forever.
Morello was to where were they, Dubai?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Vincent's husband absconded to. I thought she was going there to off him. But they never say anything about, so he could be lingering about somewhere as well still.
I really thought that Vincent's mom would come back in this book. At the end there, I really thought she was going to reappear right at the end. But
so Vincent's mom is a prominent part of Glass Hotel.
yeah, yes, yeah.
Wow. Okay, I'm going to read that for sure. I've got nothing else to read. I may as well read that.
It's really good.
Okay.
She's the master of throwing down the little clues that you don't know are clues until you get to the last page, and then you're like, oh, yes.
Yeah.
Ties it all together so perfectly.
Yeah. I really liked her author in the book. I'm assuming she was referring to herself about, writing a pandemic book during a pandemic. Then she wrote Station 11 before the pandemic,
Right.
correct? Yeah. And I thought it was interesting, her description of their pandemic, and I read the large type version, so it was on page 127. It says, we knew it was coming, and then there was a whole long passage. And I thought that was her way of explaining how it really felt to be in a pandemic, because she's been in a pandemic.
Right.
And I thought that it was a very excellent explanation, because when I was reading it, I'm like, oh yeah, because I remember, I teach high school, I'm retired now, but I was teaching then, and I remember my husband and I were following things in January and new people in China, and we were like, yeah, this is that. And I was telling people in high school, like, we're going to be closed down. And no one believed me. They're like, oh, Lord. And the biology teacher were like, oh, you're just the biology teacher. You don't know what you're talking about. And I remember going to Costco, and I'm like, toilet paper and shopping. And I see a few people doing it, and other people looking at us, and we're like, yes. We're gonna be this, and that passage there was like, it just reminded me of that feeling of what it was like, in those days before. So I thought it was her way of saying, yes, I wrote a pandemic book, but that pandemic, I really know what it feels like now. That's what I kind of felt she was trying to tell us, is that I really, I know it's a different feeling than I thought it was
well, just to follow on that, Laura, actually, she started half of those questions that are asked of her in that section were actual questions asked of her on her tour for Station 11. And that's what she started doing. She started writing a kind of silly little short piece about an author like her going around, with having written a book about a pandemic, followed by a pandemic, and then about to be another pandemic. But then she realized, oh, this is actually a really interesting story. This character is interesting. So how can I expand it and grow it into something else? At least that's what I heard her say in a nice interview that I read.
So did someone ask her if her husband, how kind it is of her husband to let her go on a book tour?
Yeah.
Take care of her child?
Yeah.
Not their child, his child.
Yeah, and she said, this was a live video, like an hour-long interview from some bookstore, and she said, yes, sometimes it's very hard to maintain equanimity when people ask you questions like that, because you want to say something terrible, you just want, and you stop and you breathe and then you answer it in some kind way. I suppose it's like actors being, you play Hamlet, Nate plays Hamlet and someone says to him, how do you learn all those lines? It's just kind of, okay, that's what fascinated you. I failed you utterly. That's all I can say. But yeah, so I think it's, that little moment. Okay, now I'm beginning to some of the things that I loved so much about the book. I loved when Gaspari's interviewing her and she stops the interview at a certain point, and then she tells you the whole of Gaspari's story, to send him out and try to solve this mystery. And then she picks up the interview exactly where she interrupted it 100 pages before. And then Gaspari does that thing, that thing that you sort of hope you'd do. Do you remember what his sister said to him before time? Where's my note here? An inhuman level of detachment, she said, in order to do what these time travelers do. And I don't know whether you remember this or not. I looked this up too, because this is a very, very important trick that playwrights do. As a way of landing that idea, the sentence before that, she says, you need an almost inhuman sense of detachment. And then she says, no, you need an inhuman sense of detachment. So the repetition really lands the idea. And and you can, and then the last thing that he says to us is, I thought immediately about how hard it would be to interview this woman knowing 3 days later she's going to be dead. And then I thought about it again as I started to interview her. And and again, she's just dropping these things in so that when you get to the moments, they have an extra richness. But I love that sequence when he talks to that writer and knows he's got a very, very, very narrow window of time. And he's got to figure out exactly what to say to persuade her that he actually is a time traveler. Like, can you imagine talking to someone who writes that kind of literature and saying, oh yeah, I'm traveling through time, and I'm actually, it's 300 years ahead of time, and I know what's going to happen to you. You just think, right, great. You're the kind of guy who goes to Comic-Con and, dresses as, Darth Vader. And yeah, I get you. Thanks a lot. But I mean, just the way that he is able to say, if somebody did that, would you go home? And then she says, well, how would I know? How do I know that you didn't change your name? And then he says, I could have, but I didn't. it's God. She'd be so much fun to know, because she just absorbs such feeling about human life. I think it's just really remarkable. And he knows by doing that. I mean, his sister basically says, the consequences will be severe and you won't be back. And I love that he's concerned that he's all his sister has. Their parents are gone, and that's weighing on him too. It's really.
And then don't we find out later, unless I am misremembering this, that remember after he tells her that and she decides to leave, her assistant tries to tell her she needs to stay and finish the tour, and you find out later the assistant is also a time traveler?
Right. Yeah. The assistant says to him in that brief moment before they send him to Ohio to go to prison, the assistant says to him something like, it's because I didn't tell my client that I was a time traveler. I did my job the way I was supposed to do it.
Oh, I think it's even worse. I think she says, you didn't know it because I'm actually good at my job.
Yeah, I'm good at my job. I didn't tell them I was a time traveler.
Yeah. Because he says it in a way to insult him even more.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm going to reveal something because I just watched this movie while I've been working out on my elliptical the last few times. And usually I watch esoteric, stupid, boring movies that no one else would ever want to watch. But over the last 4 days, I've been watching a movie that many people don't like, but I loved, and now I love it even more because I own a bookstore. But it's You've Got Mail, and there's a great moment towards the end of it where she still doesn't know that Tom Hanks is the guy on her computer that she's talking to. And Tom Hanks, he's figured it out, but he's trying now to sort of get into her good graces, even though he's created the Fox bookstore and sent her little bookstore out of business. But he says to her that this business excuse thing, it isn't personal, just business. To which she replies, well, why? It's personal to me. And it's personal to a lot of other people. And if you don't want to be personal, what the hell are you doing? And I think that's what I love about him, Gaspari, is he's in the moment and he's just responding the way you hope most decent human beings would respond. There's a woman standing in front of him who he knows is going to die, and he decides, if I persuade her and I've got 45 seconds, she won't die. And who gives a shit if it changes something? What's it going to change? How catastrophic could it be? Well, we all know answers to that. But, I just think it's so humane. The book is so, the tensions in the book are so humane, and the way that his sister keeps bending the rules because she wants, you know, you just keep feeling it. Maybe she wouldn't be doing this if it weren't for her, it was her brother. But she even says to him, fingering her necklace, that it's not bad people who make bad, who do these things. It's just one bad decision in an otherwise good life. And then, of course, you're sitting there going, no, it wasn't a bad decision. It's the right decision. But in the rules of the Time Institute, it's a bad decision. Yeah, so I don't know. I just feel like there's just an awful lot in here about how you ought to think hard about living, and the choices you make.
I liked how there's the high end of the time travel and the complexity of all of that. But then that passage, maybe that's the same one Lori is alluding to, where she's talking about the day. I get up with the little girl and I do this, and then we do this, and then we do this, and then we go to bed, and then we start all over. And that's just kind of how the whole pandemic felt. And so it's just her tiny little world of this mundane, we do this over and over and over. So there's that little part, and then people are traveling to zip in together, and it's just amazing how she balances the mundane with this incredibly complex.
Yeah.
And Station 11 was kind of like that as well. You get to the end and it's just like, boom, how did she tie this all together so perfectly? I don't think Glass Castle had quite as many surprises. That read more like a straight novel, but yeah, I just appreciate how she can just do it so well, because it could be so messy and it could utterly fail.
Right.
When you're trying to do something so complex. And I wonder if we didn't pick up on the Alan and oh my God, what's his name? What's his name? the Jacques, what's his name?
Oh, Gasperi?
Gasperi, I was gonna say Gasperi and Alan being the same person, because like usually in time travel, if that person, if you would meet yourself, there'd be some dire consequence, like someone's head would explode or something. There's some way where you can't be the same place.
Yeah.
Two beings can't be in the same space. So I think that, she kind of suspended everything else we know about time travel stories. And just, it's like, well, of course you can make up your own story. There could have been 20 Gasperis in one area. It's her book. She can make up the story. So yeah, I think it was just so clever how she totally fooled everybody, and the eye color change, and he did not recognize himself at all. I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to say a few things. Went back to her statement, for lack of a better word, that are saying that we knew it was coming, and that showed up in a couple different places in the book. And yes, I think she was referring to the pandemic, but I also thought it like referred to things that are happening now in our own world and time, like, climate change, what's happening in our country with the eroding of our democracy. It's like we can see this coming. It's like a juggernaut, and whether we can stop it or not, or, so this concept of we knew it was coming, it's here in our own lives and world, right now. And that struck me, as that sentence or phrase showed up throughout the book, because it shows up a couple different times. The other thing I guess I'd like to just put out there is the concept of hotels. Hotels is a thing throughout the book too. And it's like, okay, she's on a book tour, she's in these different hotel rooms, but she devotes a lot of time to talking about the hotel rooms, like they're the, you know, the colors that they're kind of, you know, bland, for lack of a better word. And, you know, Gasry works at a hotel as a what, security guard, or just keeping his eyes on stuff, but it's kind of boring. You know, her writing about the hotels is like they're just that. They're boring. And so I guess, like I say, that's another theme that I picked up on throughout the book, or part of it. And I just thought, you know, she devoted not quite a bit of time, but time to hotels. And it just seemed like, okay, what's that all about? So I throw that out there and see what other people think.
Yeah, I noticed that because she was going at the color. It was gray and blue. It was beige and all these colors. Yeah, I was kind of wondering that too. Yeah, now that I think about it. Yeah.
But then there's the one part where she falls, like in the middle of the night, because she's grown accustomed to one room. And then, you know, so she's kind of in this, I feel like she's kind of sleepwalking a lot because she's so exhausted and she's just moving from place to place to place constantly, never really sleeping well, worried constantly about her family. And she's, you know, hearing the inklings of the pandemic in Australia, I think is where it started. And yeah, so I think that she's kind of just sleepwalking, and maybe that plays into that partially.
Agree.
I mean, when you think about it, hotels are sort of these, you know, passing in the night, people that you're meeting people and people are leaving and coming. And with the time travel, it's kind of, you're just coming in and coming out, and maybe having an important moment, but then not knowing it, maybe, you know, in the, you know, passing in the hotel. And maybe it harks back to the previous book too, I wonder. You know. Yeah.
Well, and I think the fact the hotels are all the rooms are so alike, they're so bland. And it's kind of getting back to what Nancy was saying a little bit about the pandemic. Every day is the same. You know, you're kind of, it's just this kind of boring existence. But to get back to kind of something Barbara said about that we see it coming, there were a couple passages on page 187 and 189. I feel like Larry doing quotes. But on 187, when she's talking about post-apocalyptic literature,
Oh, yeah.
and she says, one person suggested to me that it had to do with economic inequality, that in a world that can seem fundamentally unfair, perhaps we long to just blow everything up and start over, which of course is kind of what happens in Station 11. They're starting, you know, culture all over again. But then on page 189, and then she says, my point is there's always something. I think as a species, we have a desire to believe that we're living at the climax of the story. It's a kind of narcissism. And again, I thought this fit in so well with everything going on in our world right now. We want to believe that we're uniquely important, that we're living at the end of history, that now, after all these millennia of false alarms, now is finally the worst it's ever been, that we've finally reached the end of the world.
Right. Yeah, I love both those passages, Diane. And then if you turn the page, she says, but all of this raises an interesting question. What if it always is the end of the world?
Right. That was cool too. Yeah.
Before her, the holographic audience was almost perfectly still, because we might reasonably think of the end of the world as a continuous and never-ending process.
And we always see it coming.
Yeah. That whole section, you know, that 4 or 5 pages is just full of really great stuff.
And then the other one I loved was on page 246, when he says, this is what the Time Institute never understood. If definitive proof emerges that we're living in a simulation, the correct response to that news will be, so what? A life lived in a simulation is still a life.
Yeah, that's the one I was
That
talking
was
about
just so
before.
beautiful.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly right. I mean, who gives a shit? Sometimes people would say to me, who do you think wrote Shakespeare's plays? And my response was, I don't give a damn who wrote Shakespeare's plays. I'm just glad they exist. You know, who gives a shit who wrote Shakespeare's plays? I mean, if this is a simulation, okay. But I love that he keeps saying, well, I'm hungry. Am I hungry? Am I hungry because they're simulating my hunger? Or, you know, blah, blah, you know, there's just so many great moments like that in the book. And don't you agree? I mean, but he's right. If it is a simulation, how can that matter to us, really? Other than to think, well, yeah, if I was doing a simulation and I wanted to really screw up something, what could I invent? You know, I mean, that sort of thing. You know, Donald Trump. No, but you know, it's just, but you know, it's just interesting. But I think that when I came to that page, I thought, oh yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, so as long as we're channeling our inner Larrys and reading things, here's another one that I flagged that I really love. It's when Ephraim is about to send him to Ohio. You know, Gasperi doesn't know that yet, but that's what's about to happen. And
What
and
page? What
it's
page?
on page, I'm sorry, 225. The top is 225. And what he's just found out is that, you know, he went back to see St. John, you know, the guy who'd been smashed in the war, and he managed to he died of the flu, but at least he didn't die of the flu in an insane asylum because of what Gasperi did. And then Gasperi says to Ephraim, Ephraim says, "You see how pointless that was?" And he says, "You're missing the point." That's very possible. Were there tears in Ephraim's eyes? He looked tired and strained, a man who preferred being an arborist, a man in a difficult position doing a difficult job. Is there anything you'd like to say? Are we at last words already, Ephraim? Well, last words in this century, Ephraim said. Last words on the moon. I'm afraid you'll be traveling some distance and not returning. And this next sentence is one of my favorite sentences I've ever read. Can you take care of my cat? It's just so great. And he's already found out from his sister that the cat's from 1985, you know, and the cat's living 300 years later. Ephraim blinked. Yes, Gasperi, I'll take care of your cat. Thank you. Is there anything else? And then I'd do it again. I wouldn't even hesitate. And, you know, that's the message of the book, as far as I'm concerned, is even with whatever you're going to do to me, it's the humane and right thing to do. So I would do it again, and I wouldn't even hesitate. And that's what you want Ephraim to remember, so that can play in Ephraim's mind and maybe make him realize, I ought to get out of this stupid ass thing and go back and be an arborist again, because this, you know, it's when I used to give lectures to young actors. I'd say, you know, if you start finding that you're not liking the person you are becoming, stop being an actor, because it's a business that will, if you're selfish already, it will heighten your selfish tendencies to the point of absurdity. And, you know, and your sense of yourself versus nothing else. And it's just, you know, I just think she's kind of saying to all of us, pay better attention. You know, there's so much going on that you just need to say no to. Or say, yeah, I'll do that because it's the right thing to do. I don't care about the consequences. Now, of course, Gasperi was, you know, a single man with nothing but a cat. So I know that obviously it's harder for, you know, people if their lives are full of other people. But isn't it great that his sister comes and figures out a way to get him out of jail, get him someplace else? And why didn't any of those smart people figure out he was the thing? Because that's the other tricky thing she does in that first sequence. He says to the guy in the church, I turned back. After I walked past you, I turned back and saw this thing that you were doing. And you want, and I read that again and I thought, oh, there's the clue. Because if he hadn't seen it, then it wouldn't have been in his consciousness. He saw him. So I think that's probably when he starts to put it together. It was, wait, oh yeah, I'm the factor here. And then you start thinking, how does time work really? Wow.
I actually wonder have been wondering since we started this meeting, and I totally didn't think about this when I was reading the book, but I wonder if it wasn't completely intentional to send him back, because especially the way his sister emphasizes that whole, you have to be inhumanely detached. She
Right.
says it so many times that it's like, don't do that thing. I'm serious. Don't do it. Please don't do that thing. What's going to happen? He's going to do it.
Right.
Because she's been emphasizing it. And he's kind of like, because he messes up that first interview, he's comically ill-equipped for a job like that. And the Time Institute is not a bunch of idiots. They're a bunch of bureaucrats, but would they really trust this guy to do something that important if it wasn't in fact completely intentional from the very beginning?
Mhm.
It kind of reminded me of I don't know if anyone's seen Dark on Netflix. It's a German sci-fi show.
No, I read it.
As soon as I say that, all my friends are like, but it's really, if you like very complex stories, it's fantastic. But a lot of it is like older versions of characters meeting the younger versions of themselves and sending them back in time to do certain things and being like, listen, it's gonna suck, but you have to, because that's how the timeline works. So I kind of wonder, they know what he's doing is illegal, and they know it kind of has to do with this glitch in the system. But if you think of how time travel works, because he's done all those things in the past, in his present time, he was always going to have done those things.
Mhm.
And so he does, just for the sake of physics, they do have to send him to get those things done. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's almost like he has to repair the rift.
Yeah, or like the rift has to be there because the rift is there and the rift has always been there.
Yeah, it makes your mind start going in circles.
Yeah, that's why
But I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah, I wonder just how much his sister knew, because even at the end, he says like, I don't really know what your job is. And she still doesn't answer him, even at a time where it wouldn't matter anymore. So maybe her job was to like make sure this weird little loop keeps happening.
Mhm.
Yeah, it is it's difficult because you think I'm going to, I had this weird feedback or something. There's some, am I creating that via my phone or something? I don't know. It's weird. Huh. I don't know what's going on. Hello, stuff. But all she's, yeah, because early on, his sister does say something like, people don't want to go back in time. People don't want to time travel. I mean, the people in the Institute, they know the potential repercussions and they don't want to do it. And because you have to train yourself to be so unfeeling in order to do it. But that's really interesting, Kate. I wonder if that's, so your hypothesis is that they knew all the way along
Yeah, I mean, well, as you just said, she knows that you have to train yourself to have this kind of level of unfeelingness, but she, of all people, knows her brother and
Right.
would know that he's not capable of that. I mean, the fact that his last words in the century are, "Please take care of my cat," nothing about himself. He's clearly very empathetic, very caring, and she would have known that, I think, the whole time.
So Kate, are you saying it was her job to send him back to repair the rift and all that? Is that kind of what you're saying here?
Yeah, that's what just occurred to me. I mean, I've slept like 2 hours tonight, so I have no idea what I'm saying, but it seemed like I watch a lot of time travel, and I was kind of like, huh, because it doesn't really add up, the fact that, you know, there is this highly efficient, highly competent time institute, and there's this guy who is qualified to do absolutely nothing with his life and just gets this really important, super vital job because his sister works there. It's a bit,
Well,
that wasn't satisfying.
remember, he did spend 5 years then in,
Oh, in training.
yeah, he trained for 5 years, absorbing everything too. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know. And I think that's one of the nice things about these books, is there's lots of ways to read them,
Mm.
even if you've only had 2 hours of sleep.
Well, I read the book before, but yeah, just thinking about.
Well, it sounded like they were desperate for workers. That was part of it. That's kind of how he got the job.
That's true.
All the sociopaths that had worked there, something happened to them, because who wouldn't, like, you know, if this was your job and you couldn't change anything, but you run into, you know, teenage Hitler at the edge of an abyss filled with broken glass, wouldn't you just give him a nudge? I mean, who wouldn't? You know, so I don't know.
I know. Wow.
I think that does, Kate, your idea does sort of support the idea that it is a simulation, because remember, it was their mother that had the simulation hypothesis.
Right.
And her daughter is obviously the intellectual one, so maybe she's the one keeping the simulation going, and she knows that there's a glitch. And which I was telling my husband about this, and he's a sci-fi dude. He's like, well, really, we could have simulations now of the past, because we have all the data we could put into a computer and create the world up to this moment. And then if you had that, you could send people back and change things to see what would happen. So yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
Well, I'm kind of fascinated now, because what he goes back to do, they send him to try to see what these 3 moments in time where this glitch has happened. And in their intellectual perspective, I'm trying to figure out, Kate, I'm trying to deal with your idea. From their perspective, if they know what the glitch is, then I don't know why they'd bother to send him back. In other words, if somehow this is some kind of weird loop where he's already done it, you know, that's the hardest part about trying to figure out the way the time frame works. But so somehow I don't know why he needs to go if they know what it is.
But maybe he needed to make that change, though. You know, maybe that change needed to be made in order for the future to, you know, to happen the way it is. And so she's correcting a glitch, but by his mistake, it's re-correcting the timeline. I watch a lot of Star Trek.
It's really, because when you really start to think hard about it, does this really all make sense, or does it? It's just trying. It's Where we're trying to be silly, trying to make it all make sense, you know, because it's so layered.
It could be sort of more simple than that. Not so much that he has to fix the rift or even figure out what the rift is, but if you think about the fact that his life intersects with at least 3 other people's timelines.
Right.
So that priest, not the priest, the guy, the remittance guy, goes into the woods and he meets the priest. Even if that doesn't have any real impact on him, like it doesn't change the course of his life, it's still something that happened. And so if you think about if he didn't meet that priest, then that would have been a different timeline for him to go down. Mm-hmm. And the same with Olive, if she hadn't heard that musician in the train station, it wouldn't have been in her book. Or Vincent wouldn't have had that video that she made, which wouldn't have ended up in her brother's show. None of those are necessarily consequential things if they don't happen, but the fact that in our timeline they did happen means that they have to happen that way, or else it'll be a different timeline. Right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But it also, if I'm a scientist and I notice that in 3 different moments in time spread out by 185 years, 3 people seem to have the identical experience, I'm thinking, how can that happen? How can the exact thing happen to 3 people spread out over all of that time? And so, good or bad, I want to know what that is. Whether it's a simulation or whether it, you know, whatever it is, you know, it's just. But yeah, that's where I'm with you on that sense of, if something happened and we find out at the end, or Gasperi seems to find out at the end, that he was the glitch, he was the anomaly, because he was the, you know, he was part of each of these events. Right. So how did the events get there 300 years before Gasperi was born?
But see, that's where it's hard to wrap your mind around it. It's like his sister had to make sure it happened because it had happened. Because it had happened, they had to make sure that it happened. And I watch, Lori, I watch a lot of Star Trek too. With what Nancy was just saying, there was just one on of the original series where they end up back in the 1930s, remember? And they do have that opportunity to save that woman's life, but they can't save her because then that would have changed the whole timeline with Hitler and everything. But I think, and Kate, correct me if I'm wrong, what you're trying to say is because it happened, she has to make sure it still happens. So she has to make sure he goes back and it's like a loop, and it just has to happen that way. And even though it didn't materially maybe affect the timeline, it did affect certain things in their lives.
Yeah, exactly. That's where it started to remind me of Dark a little bit, because why? Because some of those characters only exist because their parents or somebody had gone back in time and then gotten together with some other person in the past and then had a child, and then so there's one character whose daughter is her own mother, which obviously is a huge anomaly and also just weird, but the fact that it's an anomaly is kind of beside the point. So I wonder if the rift is maybe almost a red herring. Like the glitch is the glitch, but its effect on humans, including Gasperi, is the real point. Just like the pandemic is just a fluke of biology. But what it does to people and how it changes society is more the point. So if you think of the rift as just some weird time phenomenon, then it stops being the focus, and then you start thinking about who the characters are and what they had to do exactly throughout time.
Yeah, and I think that's the potency of her writing, to me, is that she creates a structure, but then within the structure, it's just the humanity of it that that moves you and affects you.
We're all trying to decipher this, and I'm imagining when we had an event with John McPhee, he talked about his cards on the wall, how he would lay out his books. I can't imagine if she has a wall like that and all the strings tying everything together. And I would love to see a picture of that if that's how she works through her stories.
Yeah.
It's so complex.
Yeah, I agree. Lori, did you say you taught science?
I do, yeah. In Berwyn, Illinois. Yeah, so I'm outside of Chicago too. So.
I'm in Chicago right now. Actually, I know where Berwyn is, but the reason I asked was that it looks like there's some kind of large sea creature over your head.
It's my my Zoom picture. It's actually from the aquarium in New Orleans. It's their stingray.
Wow. It's really
yes.
Oh.
Yeah. Actually, I've been up to your bookstore twice for vacations and things, and I got on your mailing list, and I always read the books you guys read, but I never get them done in time. This is the first time because you had the storm. And then I listened to the talks afterwards, so in your newsletter, so which is really great. During the pandemic, I was like, I can't go to the bookstore anymore. What am I going to do? So it's really wonderful. And I have to say, yes, what's the last book you read? The Fitzgerald book, The Blue Flower. I read it twice. I really enjoyed it. I really wish I had finished it ahead of time.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because
it was a strange book, but after reading it twice, I was like, it's hilarious. There's so many hilarious parts to it.
Well, here's the best part, because Larry went on and on how much he hated that book, and Larry's favorite book last year was Hamnet.
I haven't read that yet. I have to.
Written by Maggie O'Farrell, and Maggie O'Farrell's new novel is basically about all the people in the Blue Flower, including Novalis. I can't wait for Larry.
Okay, good. I have to read Hamnet. I haven't read that one.
Yeah. Oh no, you must read Hamnet.
Yeah, it's been on my list for a while.
Because it so taps into something that some of us who read that play and think about it. I've been thinking about that play for 40 years, but it's so connected to the grief. It's just so beautifully, thought through as to how that particular play could have been written, the 4 years after the death of his son. It's really unbelievably good. So put that on the top of your list, not the top, but make sure you read it. It's really an essential book. Speaking of that, Nance, we have not picked. Oh yes, next week.
Next week, the 20th, 6 o'clock. We'll do a companion piece by Allie Smith.
And we all know that there are people who love Allie Smith, and there are people.
I just started it. Yeah, I read the quartet, which I love. So.
Oh,
you did? Okay, good. Well, then this is right up your street then. But some people just find her so obtuse and jumping around that they don't care for her. But that's we don't try to read books that everybody loves. That's not the point. Hannah, hello. What would you like?
It's interesting because I just talked to two people who shall remain nameless at this point. One of whom loved it, and the other one who hated it. Oh. And I haven't started it yet. So.
Yeah. Well. It's she does a thing towards the end. I'll just say, it's getting very, very close to the end, and I think she feels like she's stuck here. But then, of course, she's a great artist of getting out of tight places, especially tight places she's built herself. But she's really a marvel, unbelievable. But we haven't picked August's book yet, is what I started to say, Nance. So we better get on that before next week.
That's that next week.
All right, Kate, go back to bed. Everybody else, Thank you.
Go buy a new lampshade.
Bye-bye.
See you next week.
See you next week.
Yes, I hope so, yes.
Yeah.